Welcome, listeners, to Future Secured. This week, we're joined by Liz Morton, Field CISO at Axonius. Liz has over 25 years of experience in IT and security across various industries, including nearly a decade leading teams at the Intercontinental Exchange and its subsidiaries, including the New York Stock Exchange. She's also been advising venture capital firms, founders, and C-suite executives on technology and cybersecurity strategy. In exciting news, Liz is visiting Australia to speak with a very select group of our leading CISOs. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz. Thank you for joining me as always, Jason. And over to you for the first question, Jason.
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, Liz, we did do a recording with you at RSA a bit earlier this year, but I think we had too much background noise and too much excitement and stuff happening. It was pretty busy on the stand over there. Just for the listeners, give us a bit of a background on yourself, but also Axonius, how you sort of came to be there, and just a bit of an intro on your current role.
Sure. Yeah. So as Tom said, I'm the Field CISO for Axonius, and prior to that, I was an Axonius customer at Intercontinental Exchange. So I got to a place where I had been with that excellent organization. If you might imagine, running cyber for the company that owns the New York Stock Exchange was a burnout maker. Just worked my butt off for close to a decade, and I needed a little break. And fortunately, the nice folks at Axonius thought I might make a good Field CISO. So without too much thought, I said, sure, sounds good. And that started my adventure in the world of being a Field CISO. So it's still pretty new to me. I've been in the job less than a year, but it's definitely taken me all kinds of new places, and I've learned all kinds of new things, which I welcome. I was getting a little burned out, and now I have a whole new world of things I've learned about.
The transition, like, you said how stressful that last job was. Field CISO wise, how's that varied, or how's that different? Because now you're sort of talking to people, your peers that were on the front line with you as well. But as a Field
Mhm.
CISO, how have you found that role, and knowing what you did about Axonius, what's changed in your world since you've sort of gone to that role?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't just immediately admit that I'm not on call and all the emergencies are someone else's right now. So,
Mm.
from a
Yep.
burnout perspective, it has given me an opportunity to just take a break. Everybody who is in the field has very conscious knowledge that we're dealing with some stuff that's very important. We're dealing with things that very often require, decisions to be made at the snap of a finger, and the implications of making the wrong decision can really weigh on you. I was very fortunate in that I had a good foundation with my leadership at ICE to train me up, basically to feel very comfortable with all those decisions and all the pressure. I did just fine. However, as burnout often is, it can kind of eat away at you a little bit. And I realized that my kids were at an age when I would really like to spend a little more time with them. The demands of a job like the one I had are constant. So the biggest change is that I see my kids more. I'm at home more. I do travel quite a bit more. So there's a trade-off. It's a different kind of stress. It's the stress of almost not having my kind of finger on the trigger, so to speak. So when I see something going wrong, I have to kind of advise, but not step in. So that I sometimes have to have a little talk with myself about letting things go and giving the best advice I can, and then kind of moving on, because that's the nature of the work. I can't tell you how, really, the one thing in this job that I didn't anticipate that I like the most is just how much exposure I get to what's happening in cybersecurity all over in different industries, different countries. And I think it's a real privilege. And frankly, it's better than any sabbatical I could have ever scheduled for myself, because I'm still in the industry and I'm still doing day-to-day stuff. I'm just doing it at a whole bunch of different companies, large, small, critical infrastructure, and so forth. It's a pretty cool job.
Yeah, because sometimes you get stuck in your bubble, don't you? Like when you're in an industry or you're at a job, and Tom and I do a lot of, and we're doing the round table with you and Axonius coming up, and what we find is, getting the peers together to have a chat. It's often Chatham House rules, obviously in this sort of environment. And
Mhm.
it's funny when you get someone from a large organization often say, well, we have this issue, and you can sort of see the relief around the table for the other CISOs or C-suite go, oh shit, it's not just us, right? It's
Yeah,
actually the
yeah,
big end of town have that same issue, even with their big team,
totally.
So I think you probably would have seen, and being in the pocket of some of these people now, a different perspective on things also, wouldn't you? Where you think, oh, gee,
Mhm.
I didn't expect that, or that's a different way of looking at it, or because I was in a certain industry from that critical infrastructure, so I didn't realize that would be an issue, So what are some of the top things you've sort of seen from now being in that position, from coming from where you are, that you see are sort of common threads or themes that you're seeing across the board from these guys?
Well, everybody's doing their best. How about that? I'd
Mm.
start
Yeah.
as just a fundamental base statement. And I'll qualify it a little bit. Just about everybody is doing their best. I think in this day and age, the companies that I'm encountering, frankly, whether I'm dealing with local municipalities, educational systems, healthcare systems, I mean, I get to talk to everybody. No one that I have encountered is kind of burying their head in the sand anymore. It's just too big a problem, too much of an expectation. I think that's a great indication that the cyber industry in general is it's maturing, and now it's an expected, not a bonus, right? I mean, I came out of the financial industry working for a company that was also, and in addition to being in the financial industry and heavily regulated, also considered globally systemically critical infrastructure in several sovereign nations. So we had everybody that we had to answer. We had to do big compliance. We had to do big security work. We had to do large projects, big budgets. From a just sort of knowing your industry, knowing the practice perspective. I feel like my training ground was some of the best in the world. Um, Not everybody has that. Some
Mm.
companies don't have the programs, they don't have the systems, they don't have the money. A lot of companies don't have the money, and even if they did, they don't have the personnel. So I feel like I learned I kind of got my chops, if you will, at the best place possible. And a lot of what I spend my time doing is taking those premises and breaking them down with our customers, talking about strategy, talking about how to make a big, kind of the upsides of a big company program work for them. I do that in the capacity as Axonius's Field CISO. So fortunately, I have a product that it has a lot of range. It has a lot of use cases. It has a lot of utility. So it's easy enough to sit down and say, okay, in my program where I had an X million-dollar budget for this area of practice, here's how we did this. You don't have that. You don't have that budget. You don't have that regulator. You don't have the support from your senior management to have that fulsome of a program that I may have had. However, here are some things I learned, and here are some simple ways you can implement that in your practice. And it starts there, and very often I end up learning something about an industry that I didn't know before. You can't know everything, right? And there are a lot of really, really bright people who are doing their best to do, more with less, like everybody else.
Mm.
So I find it to be just professionally and personally very rewarding to help them do that, because not like everybody needs to be secure, but not everybody is going to have the sort of blessings, if you will, of a large budget. So that's where you have to get creative, and I like working in that space.
That's a really cool story. So when we were at RSA, one of the things that you were sharing to me was I think it was an airport or over there that you'd kind of been
Oh
working with
yeah.
and helping secure. And
Hmm.
I think one of the things that you encounter here in Australia a lot, and I imagine it's a very big global problem with enterprise organisations, is just the breadth of the data, the siloing of the data and stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
so there's one thing is defending against the cyber attackers, but there's also that visibility of what actually your threat
Hmm.
landscape and threat surfaces are. So, what are you seeing out there as you kind of go around these companies? And I'd also be really interested in you to touch on that transition from, being a client of Axonius to now the other side, actually,
Hmm.
what it's like kind of deploying that out for people as well.
Yeah, so just a word on that. I had never really thought about being customer facing before. I mean, I'm almost 30 years a practitioner, and just kind of went from being a hands on engineer to eventually being in management to eventually running my own practice. And I really thought that that was, excuse me, going to be where I spent my career. And just the suggestion of being customer facing, I guess it didn't throw me off at all. So I thought I'd give it a try, and I'm very glad I did. The transition, fortunately, this is all codifying around a piece of technology that I really believe in. I mean, I
Mm.
bought it for my old shop, and frankly, it took me, as it takes our customers and prospective customers, it took me a minute to really understand the value prop that a tool like Axonius, a platform like Axonius brings forth. Because that visibility thing is just something that we've been more or less conditioned to understand can't happen. No one has figured that out. Nobody can do an accurate inventory. I can remember in the early days of my career when I was still running in and out of data centers back in the day when the dinosaurs still walked the earth and we had to plug cables into things. I can remember doing inventory with like, a clipboard and pointing at servers and writing down names. I mean, that was the best thing we could do. And of course you'd finish that and you'd be like, whew, we finally have an inventory. 3 minutes later, it was wrong because of course that's how tech works. So I feel like I'm representing an excellent product that serves a real need because, boy, what a silly thing to have to still say in 2025, but you cannot secure what you cannot see. So I do feel like Axonius and products like that are focusing on getting a real picture of everything that's happening, getting a real picture of what does your environment look like. I think they're fundamentally essential, and I would not be surprised. I'm not one for doing big predictions. That's not really my thing. But I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years or so, the very notion of trying to run a practice of any kind without a product like Axonius would just be considered, inexpert, bananas, however you want to say it, because it's so fundamentally important. And we've just learned to live without it in this industry for so long. And now we don't have to. That makes our outcomes much more predictable. Frankly, I'm a person who did 25 years in operations and IT and security engineering, and then I moved into a full-time cyber gig. And while I had an excellent staff, cannot understate how talented the individuals I worked with at ICE were. Um, they didn't have a whole lot of operational know-how. And that's just because very often cyber does not have responsibilities that align to your operational groups. So if you want to know where I started day one, when I transitioned into cyber, I started with change control and maintenance windows and incidents and some basics of operations that really helped cyber move in line with operations. And then in combination with things like Axonius and some other tools that gave visibility and really was able to power the automation programs that we had, was able to inform how we prioritize, made risk-based decisions, etc. I mean, it. I know I'm the field CISO for Axonius, and I'm going to sing its praises anyway. But like this particular kind of product makes so much possible, and in a very simple way.
And you would have seen some changes from the product too, wouldn't you? From when you were using it too, and you probably see it a lot more. You probably underutilize a tool sometimes when you're using it amongst a lot of others, and now you're sitting in the Axonius shoes. Another thing I probably would hazard a guess is that you don't actually probably have more insight now from being there and go, oh, maybe we underutilized the tool a bit when I was using it previously, and now you could be in a position going, hey, actually, so in this position, you could do this, this, and this, and you could probably see because you're sort of almost helicoptering out a bit now and being able to see the full field, so to speak. And you can probably give them what are some of the things you've seen that you probably think are probably underutilized within that environment that you've actually been able to suggest to other CISOs to utilize? What's been the main things that you've seen now sitting on this side of the fence?
That's a great question.
I have them
There
occasionally.
are.
It doesn't happen. Tom, mark that down there.
Yeah,
I've got
I've
mine.
written it
Plan
down.
that artfully.
How many
Plan that
episodes was
artfully.
that?
But it's a great question.
Yeah.
Realistically, there's not one thing. But what an interesting idea. And I've thought of this before. Like, sometimes I wish I could get like a time machine and go back to
Mm,
my old chair and be like, hey, you guys, we should totally be doing these things
yeah.
this way. Um, and really it's one of the beauties of being in this job and like getting to really work as an advisor. You kind of, sometimes you don't know, if you don't have a problem, you don't know the solution. I mean, maybe you know it,
Mm,
but it's not troubling you, so you're not thinking through it. And I would say I'm actually starting a series on Tuesday on LinkedIn where I'm going to start writing about our top 10 use cases at Axonius, like really from my seat, with all the conversations I have, how are our customers making use of the platform to make their outcomes better, to save time? One of the things I would say, just to answer your question directly, Jason, is I wish I would have thought more about how much time a
mm,
platform like this could save my team, and I probably would have prioritized that. And by so doing, I think we would have probably realized, even in a program that was heavy on automation, I think we would have realized, you know, anywhere between, like the time savings of a job that really we do it once a week. I had, you see this, have a job that runs once a week, and like, yeah, you kind of kick it off, or maybe you've got it kind of half automated. There were a lot of little things like that I would have gone in and said, no, 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 we've got a great data layer. Let's just use Enforcement Center and like let's tie this up. We had our
Mm.
own automation platform. Axonius has one as well. I think I probably would have said, hey, let's stop writing our own automation. Let's just use what we already have. Let's make it a little more simple. You said something about tools. Cyber as an industry has been addicted to shopping forever.
Mm.
Like, we just love to buy tools. We like to line them all up and talk about how great they are. And the truth is, I think most shops, and mine included, um, I think we probably could have shaved 2, 3, maybe even 4 tools from our run
Mm.
had we decided to do so. I think now that's something I'm seeing much more now, because budgets are pressed,
Yep.
because we are looking at not being able to expand our teams. I think
Mm.
now, um, cyber folk are starting to look at each tool, as they should, frankly, as a
Yep.
uh, as a mouth to feed. And I think there's a lot more focus on consolidation and being much more specific about how you're going to spend your dollar, what that looks like, from a functional everyday perspective. Does that answer your question?
That's a great, yeah, and that because that's exactly what's happening at the moment, is that there's a lot of tools that are doing similar or same things, and people are sometimes doubling, tripling, or even quadrupling up on stuff that they don't even need. So I think that's another thing, is having that step back from where you are now. You can probably see that a lot more clearly than when you're in the mire of actually running your own stuff. That it's sometimes hard to get that break and that time to actually step out and see it. So this is where I see Field CISOs, not just yourself, but others in the area, are so beneficial, is because now you've got a clean perspective and you've got something. Although you are selling a tool yourself, you have the pragmatic approach that you've actually been in the situation where you can say, look, yeah, I am representing Axonius, and also have you considered this, this, and this as options for sort of cleaning up tools? And I think
Yes.
that is something with reduced budgets that, yeah, we really have to look at. And there's a lot of tools and a lot of people buying up other businesses and stuff, and then that's changing, the look and feel of things as well. So
Mhm.
no, that's a great answer, because I think this is something that not enough people do look at. We are getting squeezed with budgets, teams are getting smaller, AI is coming into play. How do you utilize that best? And Axonius genuinely, as a product, is one of the most unique ones in the market, but probably underknown or unknown by a lot of people, and
Yeah.
underutilized by the people who already have it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe misunderstood. I would put maybe
Mm. Yeah.
misunderstood and underappreciated, really, because one of the problems, and it's not just Axonius. Axonius
Mm.
has competitors, and there are all kinds of like CTEM, attack surface management companies that have come out with tooling that works similarly, right? The whole idea is aggregate the noise, right? All
Mm.
the data that's coming from all your various data silos, aggregate it all, clean it up. Axonius is the best in. They're just I know, because I've POC'd a
Mm.
bunch of our competitors
Mm.
when I was in my old chair. Axonius really does create the best data set. We have a correlation engine that's second to none. And I'm very lucky, because I get to work for this company that makes a product that is really truly useful. Here's what you have, right? Once you have that visibility, what you have is you have the ability to really see for real, not what you think, not what you guess,
Mm.
but what really is going on in your environment. I think a lot of our addiction to buying tools has to do with insecurity over not knowing that. I think if
Mm.
we knew exactly what we had, we could stop shopping and start remediating, and do so
Yeah,
much
good
more
point.
quickly and much more effectively. So it's a mindset. And I think it's one that over time, again, I do think that these tools will become ubiquitous, because it is such a big problem. More tools, more data, more data, more noise. More noise does
Mm.
not equal more security. And I think, with especially the budget squeeze going on, and some of the other sort of, socio-political stuff going on
Mm.
globally, there is a lot of pressure to get it right, but get it right, um, at a cost that is reasonable. The
Yep.
days of spending millions and millions and millions with an open checkbook for cyber. They're over. They have to be over.
Mm.
And in a way, I'm kind of glad they're over, because it's going to require then that our industry follows suit with traditional IT and operations and development and DevOps. And efficiency is not without a cap on cost, because that is part of the efficiency equation.
Yeah,
There's
no,
a
great point.
really interesting story that came out when I was chatting to the Australian Axonius team, and Paul, the systems architect, was telling me about when they rolled Axonius out for a large client in Australia, and they got into a bit of an argument with the supplier of a tool to what you're talking about, who was saying there was only 6,000 devices on the network, and Axonius had kind of found 9,000. Then it turned out there was a license cap on the tool, and every time it ran the scan, it would kind of basically then invent some numbers at the back end and stuff like that. So I guess how important and what is your experience at seeing that aha moment when people get that federated view across their systems, as opposed to, because I mean there's a business in basically someone coming in and looking at all your tools and telling you which ones to have and which ones haven't. To your point now, it's become a little micro business within cyber. So that federated view, how powerful is that to have?
I mean, it's huge. I'll tell you, in my own POV, we had a couple things happen. One, we had a misconfiguration on our ESX hosts. Nothing big, but we were having reanimations, right? So decommissioned ESX guests that had come back online after reboot, because the ESX hosts had a variation in their configuration. That was an easy fix once we were able to see it. But it solved all kinds of like, how'd that come back online? Why is that there? The CMDB says it's decommed. It's not. We had some incidents that were, not up to snuff, so to speak, by our standards, because of this little problem. Little problem amplified without being remediated, led to some bigger problems. And we also, so that was just like one example of how we were able to leverage, even in POV, the power of visibility. And then we had another couple of incidents where we had, critical infrastructure. Sometimes when you're critical infrastructure, you get to know things for everybody else. So we had a couple of 0 days come through that were pre-announced to us, pre-announcement to the public. We became aware of them. And we had a proprietary process at ICE called the PHNB process, potentially harmful new vulnerabilities. And I can just say my best plug for Axonius, like, they could have just hired me to say this one thing over and over, and probably I would have been just as effective. We went from having a process that it took an entire day to run for my Intel team to gather asset data and walk our environment. We went down to 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Like, huge savings. We were fast. We were in and out of there. We were able to direct operations to do high priority remediation right away. We were able to put a plan in place for all of our second and third tier prioritizations for the remediation. And by the time these 0 days, as I recall, it's been a little while now, but by the time both of those 0 days were announced, we had already shut our risk down to near zero for anything externally facing. To me, that is a win. It is a win all day long. So a couple of examples. And we see that all the time with customers. Once you know what you have for the first time, and we've had customers recover hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing fees that were incorrectly charged. We've had customers figure out that they had publicly IP'd hosts in their DMZ without any kind of protection at all. And of course, we've had customers walk their infrastructure and find all kinds of naughty IOCs, to just give a couple of examples. I always am charmed whenever customers talk to us in the POV readout about the stuff they found. Sometimes they tell us, and sometimes they'll just tell us later they found stuff and fixed it before they bought it. We don't care one way or the other. We just want you to be secure.
Yeah, and I think that's the outcome of everyone. So this is the thing is, regardless of product or tool or anything that you use, it's where everything fits in the ecosystem and is assisting, across the board. So with, you've got clients all over the place. You're obviously domiciled in the US. Coming out to Australia, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences in what the two countries do. Obviously our size is different. but a
Mhm.
lot of the culture and everything is the same. What have you seen, probably as a lead, because we do follow a lot what happens in the US. What are you seeing as a lead of where things are going? I mean, we have to. It's the elephant in the room, obviously, at the moment. AI, is in there, and it's part of your platform and what you guys do. But what do we need to look at as and you're coming out here later this month, but what do we need to look at here in Australia to say, here's some leads from the US that we really should be taking more notice of, that you're really seeing start to pivot and change in the US currently?
I think there is a renewed interest in the fundamentals. I wish I had something,
Mm,
sexier to say, but I think there is, again, with the budget pressure and with just wallets not being as open, and yet the regulators are getting kind of tougher and tougher because
mm,
they're getting more and more conversant, frankly, in tech. The regulators used to come to private industry, frankly, I mean, for expertise.
mm,
They kind of had to be led a little bit by us because we had so much expertise and so much money and could move so much faster. And I think that time is a bit over because I think the regulators have gotten a little bit more intelligent about the realities, right? Not just
mm,
your compliance paperwork, but what are the realities of a secure organization? What does that look like? I think we have just more information now, and so do the regulators. It's just an example. I think there's a lot of focus on the fundamentals because there have now been so many incidents where the
mm.
fundamentals were what was wrong. I mean, think about Change Healthcare, missing
Yeah,
MFA. Really? We
yeah,
we really sacrificed the well-being of nearly the entire American health system because no MFA. Like these kinds of things become almost impossible to excuse from a business perspective, and the law is starting to catch up with that, as I'm sure you know. I don't
yeah.
think that's any different the world over. I think in the U.S., however, with AI looming, we've looked around left and right and tried to figure out what we do to actually secure organizations in the face of AI powered attackers. And let's just call it, without being too dramatic, an enemy that can move lightning fast, iterate on on demand, and never sleeps, and
Mm,
doesn't have to be particularly accurate to be successful. That's always been true of attackers, but now with AI, it's just exponentially more. And really, as silly as it sounds, if you're operating at scale in a world where AI powered attackers are as ubiquitous as they are becoming, and you do not have a good line of sight into where you have gaps in your security controls, you don't have EDR looking out for your endpoints,
mm,
you're playing with fire. And I think that really is where a lot of companies are trying to settle. For one thing, with the help of tools like Axonius, you can see where you have not realized the full extent of your investment. What do I mean by that? If you have purchased a CrowdStrike, for instance, and it has not really been 100% deployed, you're not getting the full value. In this environment where new budget is hard to come by and new headcount is hard to come by, it does really seem like just making sure that the stuff you already bought is properly deployed. And especially when you're talking about something as effective as EDR, we've seen attackers try to circumvent EDRs. What are they now attacking? They're now attacking, you know, devices that EDR can't be deployed to. For instance, we
mm.
we all know what's happening with route switch. We all see what's happening with network security and the ways that our attackers are approaching intrusion and how it's changed. That should tell you that the basics matter. When your enemy can move super fast, having something that also never sleeps, that is persistent, that is effective, that does report immediately. I mean, it just becomes ABC stuff. It kind of
Mm.
was before, but we were very interested in doing other more exciting things. Now I think our budget crisis has kind of forced us to go back and maybe instead of spending new money, just get more out of the money we've already spent. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great observation, because that is the thing, isn't it? Is that we got so sort of excited about all these new products and these new tools that we did, and a lot across the industry forgot about the bare bone basics. And as you said, the simple way in is, an old password, MFA
Yeah.
not being put on, updates
Yeah.
not being done or patching not being done. So they're three very, you think, base and grounding sort of things that with most organizations. But as you said, the new shiny product was always well, I've got to have that. That'll
Yeah.
fix everything else if I get that. And we often forgot about and left behind those very basic tenets. So it's good to actually call that out, because that is still, when we look at the attacks, and I think Tom and I had a recent briefing when we were looking at some of the attacks that are coming in, are still a very simple click on something that's in a WhatsApp or, a
Yeah.
Zoom link or something that's very basic. It wasn't,
Yep.
we were sort of sitting there, I think Tom and I both going, oh, this would be great. We're going to see some really sexy sort of attacks. And everyone they broke down from any part of the world was like, it's still that 101 basic shit that's still getting in
I
there.
know.
There is
I
nothing
know.
really, James Bondish or anything like that, where someone, climbing through a window in a server room or anything like that.
Oh
It's just,
yeah.
to send a link and they click on the link and then they get in. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that old chest
We're
up.
all ready
Yeah,
for
the
yeah,
greatest
we're all
hits
ready
still
for
there.
these complex attacks and all this
Yeah,
craziness. And really it's still just some guy in accounting that just keeps clicking the bad link.
yeah,
You know how
yeah, yeah,
disappointed I was, Jason, when I got to cyber and I thought I was gonna see behind the curtain and all this amazing stuff
yeah.
was gonna be going on. And
Nothing.
I was like,
Yeah.
no, it's just that guy from accounting still clicking on links.
Yeah, it's usually not just accounting, it's usually one of the C-suite that's usually clicking on it.
Oh,
So it's usually a
I'm
whaling
not
one.
supposed
So
to
it's
say that out loud, but I guess I don't.
yeah,
I guess I can say
yeah,
it. Yeah, it's always somebody in the
yeah.
C-suite, of course.
So,
And
that was the thing. I
identities,
think that,
you know.
yeah, we were
We,
we were just really, we felt really let down. Went to this real great briefing, and it was all secret squirrels, and then we heard that, we're like, oh, is that it?
yeah,
Darn.
yeah. Still business
Yeah,
email compromise all these
yeah,
years later.
yeah.
And identities as part of the attack surface, like we've
Mm,
been kind of over in the operational world. There's been all kinds of sort of name and shame around, automation or lack thereof in your identities processes. If you aren't automated, you're probably sitting on a whole ball of trouble. True enough. I did some thought pieces earlier this year about identities because we were launching our identities product, which, small plug, is very good without being the kind of product that takes, forever and 3 years to deploy. And I'll just leave it at that. One of the
mm,
things I thought was most interesting is that something on the order of like 68% of all of the intrusions reported by public companies to the SEC involved identities. And
mm,
I feel like the other percentage of attacks, just they didn't talk about the identities component because there was something else that was more interesting. But we're getting hip to the fact that I mean, you haven't had a password rotation in 3 years and your password is 12345 6. I mean, it's like a Mel Brooks joke. Come on.
mm,
We have reached a level of sophistication. We have the technology. These kind of simple matters of hygiene and process, and the tools exist to make these things not just easier, because let's not forget, human beings should never, in my opinion, human beings should never have to right click and change password in ADUC ever again. Like, come
mm,
on. We can make this stuff seamless. We can remove friction while also upping our overall posture if we just work a little bit smarter and stay tight with the fundamentals. It really does make a big difference.
mm.
What do you think about, in your experience, some kind of pushes around the culture with enterprise and critical infrastructure, that needs to be in the C-suite that kind of change this? I mean, in Australia, we've got, new legislation around cyber. One of them is mandatory ransomware reporting. But the reality is when you dive down that they've admitted that is just so they can get an idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
So, to some degree, they're still so far behind. And we just recently had spoken to Mark Rosnick, who's out here in Australia, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and he shared an interesting briefing under Chatham House rules about insider threats. But when we were chatting to him, he was basically talking about how AI had come and kind of like knocked, police sideways, that they're struggling to catch up. They're struggling to get a grasp on this. So, I mean, we can't just always have these organizations running behind. So where are the cultural shifts that kind of need to happen, I guess, yesterday, or at least start today in a way from your experience?
Oh, Mr. Finnegan, if I had all those answers, I think I'd probably have my own podcast and be talking, be
That's why
talking
we get
about
to ask the
where
questions
I
of
am.
experts like you.
Yes.
I don't envy just thinking of the example of your Royal Canadian Mounted Police gentleman. I don't envy the job of the police. without getting too specific, because it gets very hairy very quickly, AI has posed no end of trouble for the policing of cybercrime. We could say it's changed the face. I think it's just accelerated some
Mm.
of the worst parts of the
Especially the
cyber
identity
wars.
part too, Liz, right? Like the identity now with voice cloning and being able to
Oh,
replicate that sort of stuff,
deepfakes, all that.
and even
Yeah,
just the phishing stuff where it used to be, the Nigerian letter scams and stuff, which was quite,
right.
simple for the majority of people to see through. It still caught some people out, but now
Yeah.
the replication of phishing emails and the now being able to put stuff in pure English, in written
Yes.
form, where you used to be able to pick that stuff up, those things have changed. And also, if we talk about third and fourth party risk, etc., as well, there's also those elements that come in as well, isn't it? Outside your environment that can sometimes permeate and cause issues that we see. A lot of attacks are causing issues as well, don't we?
Yes, and just the whole notion of having a world where deepfakes are so sort of ubiquitous, and we all know the story about the gentleman who let go of 25 million to
Mm,
deepfakes, and I mean, what a nightmare, right?
mm,
This stuff is still too new to have reliable response tooling procedures. It's still something that's very unexpected, and it's something that can be incredibly intrepid. I'm thinking, defrauding a company out of millions of dollars, that's one thing. Defrauding an individual out of their life savings. And I saw a lot
mm,
of this, unfortunately, because of my practice at the Intercontinental Exchange. When you have a name like the New York Stock Exchange, lots and lots and lots of people will use that name to defraud
mm,
people out of their life savings. And I had direct touch with that. It's devastating. Law enforcement has to field those folks. They have to have something that they can do for them. And very often, money's gone,
mm,
just as an example. And then we get into things like trafficking, and we get into things like exploitation. It is a wicked world, and AI has just made the operators of the worst parts of it all that more capable, successful, etc. Um, and so I don't envy those that have to fight the front lines of the real problems. And I'm not suggesting that, corporations being fleeced for millions of dollars isn't a big problem. It is, because, of course,
mm,
where's all the funding for this evil coming from? It's coming from efforts like that.
mm.
I don't have great answers, to be honest.
That's
There
why we
are
brought you
a
on
lot.
here, Liz. You're supposed to have all the answers, and
Sorry.
that's
No.
exactly why we brought you
Reset the
on here.
culture.
That yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It was you
No.
were going to
Well,
just give us all the answers, and then
sorry.
that's
I
it. We
don't.
drop the microphone, and walk off. What are you
Sorry,
doing?
this is the point. I didn't
You've let
realize
us
I was
down.
going to have to save the world tonight.
Yeah, that was it.
Oh, damn it. I missed my big moment. You guys,
Yeah,
now I can't come
we
to
probably should have
Australia. I'm
pre-warned
embarrassed.
you. We probably should have pre-warned you and
Ugh,
said, this is the it podcast for us. I've asked one good question out of all
I'm
this.
doing
That's the
my
end for
best.
me. You were supposed to just finish it off and say, "Here's the solution. We just do
And
this,"
that's how
and
we save
it's
the world.
yeah,
Sorry.
game over.
I was going to say, on a much lesser note, and certainly far less world saving, I was a Black Hat, and I walked through the startup city. And one thing I did notice, and I talked about this with a few of my friends that were out there, startup city this year and the rest of the floor, they were not the same world. There's
Mm,
stuff going on in startup city that's like, this is the world we're going to. And
yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of AI. It was a lot of deepfake detection. It was a lot of um, identity validation and verification, right? So we've been talking about authentication forever and ever and ever.
Mm,
Um, Now, sure, we can authenticate you. We can give you what you're entitled to, of course. First, we're going to need to know that you're real. If
mm,
anybody's done any hiring in an offshore situation, there are certain areas of the world where you'll find large groups of people that are, interested in having jobs on help desks or on SOCs. And sometimes you find yourself in interviews with people that may or may not be the people that are on the resume. They may have a different person come in than you interviewed with. I mean, there's all kinds of kind of the world of even LinkedIn is getting weird and scammy, and AI has a lot to do with that. The
mm,
leveraging of just one thought or idea and the ability to iterate it just enough to make it believable enough will catch enough people to make various attackers' plans worthwhile. Again, it's not a different story. Attackers have always had the advantage. They can be wrong every single day,
Mm.
and still profit.
Mm.
We're the ones that have to be right because we're defending generally very specific things. Our organizations, sometimes our friends and family. So we have a slightly tougher job. But I still
Yeah.
don't have any answers for how to save the world. Sorry, guys.
Mm.
Well, maybe just a final comment on where we're going. So, it was interesting last year at RSA when Jason and I were there. It was all about AI agents. This year, it was about agentic AI. A lot of the businesses on the main floor we were looking at were really just products built on public LLMs, and you could see them
Mm.
just getting sucked up and disappeared. Again, to your point, the startup area was the most interesting place, and that's where we both spent a bit of our time and really kind of seeing that cutting edge, where things are going. So, what do you think is the kind of smoke and mirrors, and where do you think, is it all going to be about AI? Or are we, I mean, pretty soon Elon Musk's robots that are in mass production will be running around doing so many of the jobs for us as well. So where do you think in cybersecurity in the kind of defensive space is I guess the stuff other than Axonius and that kind of federated view that is really speaking to you?
I think, generally speaking, speed is going to continue to be like speed of response, speed of containment. I think those things are going to continue to sort of be the name of the game for SOCs. I think we are also on the precipice, and you can see it in products like I'm very familiar with Sentinel One's. They used to call it Purple AI. I'm not sure what they're
Mm.
calling it today, but CrowdStrike has something similar. The AI powered SOC. I think there's going to be a lot of that. AI powered SOC, AI powered vulnerability management. AI is great at correlation. It's great at finding patterns that others like humans would miss. And just those two ideas, put everything else that AI could do in reality or in fiction aside. Just being able to be faster and more efficient at differentiating between a false positive and a real alert, that wins the day. Just being able to
Mm.
take your team's attention off of the minutia and put it onto that sort of higher level work, you get two things. One, human beings want meaningful work. And we have this problem where when you get to the reactive phase of defense, right, you get to your SOC, you've kind of done all of the work to make sure that you have a hardened environment. You're still going to get alerts. If you're like my old shop where you get thousands of alerts every month, you're going to end up with a situation outside of having false positive automation, outside of having some assistance, you're going to get to a point where your SOC folks are just going to miss. They're going to miss because they're burned out. You put eyes on glass all day long. You don't have efficiency in your processes. You have too many tools. You have too many consoles. Human beings will miss. So you've made these huge investments, and without the assistance of AI, you're still going to be sort of at the mercy of human error, which is what AI fixes for us. So I think that there's going to be a lot of focus on rethinking the basics, having AI do sort of the heavy lifting of analysis. Because again, you can take disparate ideas, put them together, and AI can say, here are some suggestions. If you've ever used any of these AI powered tools, the suggestions part is what I like the best. Sometimes the suggestions are bunk, and you're like, well, that's a bad suggestion. I have knowledge of this whole situation, and you've added one and one and gotten three. That's okay.
Mm.
That's why I'm here. I'm a human. Um, um, but if you can tune out 90% of the alerts that come through to your SOC, for instance, and you tune them out either by defining them as false positive, throwing them into a queue for review later to make sure we haven't made any mistakes. But what if AI can actually say, I know what that is. I'm going to remediate it. I'm going to do that for you and send you a little report. We're starting to see things like that too. When we talk about risk-based vulnerability management, for instance, we're starting to talk instead about CTEM. Okay, so there was vulnerability
Mm.
management, then there was RBVM, and we've gone to CTEM. All this, by the way, has happened in like the last year. And
Mm.
why? Because CTEM is addressing the exposure, right? Which is really where you have the problem. All vulnerabilities are not exposures. All vulnerabilities are not problematic. Sure, they should be remediated. I'm not saying we should ignore our mediums and lows or anything like that, but everything exists in a context. So what AI is great at is saying, hey, you have this vulnerability. It's sitting on an externally facing host. By the way, that host seems to not have a configuration that squares with your intended configuration. I think you should look at this first. You've got a high on a crown jewel system here, but that's on an internal network. Maybe that's second. Humans are exponentially more useful when we have good solid data and good solid guidance, whether that comes from a person like me who's been around for so long I can kind of sniff trouble in the air, or whether it comes from AI, which is probably a little bit more effective.
It's been a great conversation, Liz. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to seeing you out in Australia, and specifically for the few lucky CISOs who are going to be around the table to hear some of the Chatham House rule stories that you can actually share.
Cool.
Some of that kind of detailed stuff is going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
So, listeners, you can follow Liz on LinkedIn, as dodgy as it may be becoming, and check out Axonius as well. That full federated view
And
of
Liz's
those
top
whole
10
systems.
tips, Tommy. She's got
the top 10 tips on LinkedIn. Definitely check
it.
them
Might
out.
be Liz, it might be fake Liz, but let's check out what they are as well on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, look, thank you, Liz, for joining us. Thank you, Jason, as always, my co-host. It's been a wonderful
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Liz. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Can't wait.